I'm very happy to be joined, as I'm always happy when this man joins us, president of Judicial Watch, author of the New York Times bestseller Clean House, Exposing Our Government's Secrets and Lies, Tom Fitton. Good Friday to you, Tom.
Hi, Larry. How are you?
I'm good, and I'm really astounded by the latest revelation that you put out last night, late yesterday afternoon. This goes all the way back to the IRS scandal. You've been looking to get these emails and notes of meetings from senators involved in the IRS with Lois Lerner for how long now? How many years back does this go?
Well, at least since 2013, so 5 years, a full presidency, over a full presidency, and we're still going through the documents we have. We got tens of thousands of pages of documents from the IRS, and we have these documents that we uncovered that show a meeting took place just before the IRS scandal broke back in 2013, where IRS staff were called up on the Hill to meet with staff for Senator Levin, who's a Democrat from Michigan, and Senator John McCain. And McCain's staffer, according to the IRS notes, because they were talking about 501c4s, political advocacy groups that, the campaign finance crowd who want to regulate the First Amendment didn't like, including John McCain. His staffer recommended, because he had all these 501c4 groups that they weren't able to control effectively, that they just audit them in a financially ruinous way.
Yeah,
and that's almost an exact quote.
In fact, I'll read it. It's maybe the solution is to audit so many that it is financially ruinous. In other words, this is a staffer from the United States Senate, specifically John McCain's former staff director and chief counsel to the Senate Homeland Security Permanent Subcommittee, suggesting that the IRS weaponize their audits to ruin these political advocacy groups.
Oh, that's right. And little did they know it was already taking place. And, of course, the IRS, according to the meeting notes, didn't push back. And Lois Lerner later said that, look, I'm running everything here.
Yeah, I got this, guys. I got this.
That response.
So let's be... go ahead.
So you've got John McCain's top guy doing this. And on top of that, his top guy now is President Trump's top guy in the United States Office of Special Counsel. He's the he's the special counsel for the Office of Special Counsel, which is the ethics body for the United States federal agencies.
Yeah. Now, in your report, and I read your report pretty clearly, and you actually went out of your way to say that the IRS scandal was a bipartisan scandal. Both Republicans and Democrats have dirty hands on this. Does your report and your analysis of the notes and emails that you've read suggest that John McCain or his staff were specifically asking the IRS to stop Tea Party groups?
It doesn't say Tea Party groups.
Or conservative groups, for that matter.
I mean, the Lerner IRS was focusing on the Tea Party groups, and they kind of talked around that, according to the meeting notes in their visit with Levin and McCain's staff. What's also interesting is that they were also pushing to prosecute these groups, not McCain, but another Democrat in the Senate, Senator Whitehouse. And Robert Mueller's FBI and Obama's DOJ was working with Lerner's IRS on ways to try to prosecute the very groups that McCain's staffer was saying should be ruinously audited. This is your government during the age of Obama, and John McCain, in his efforts to control speech through regulation, was willing to use the IRS to destroy people who dared to spend too much money on politics, according to his lights. And on top of that, you had the Democrats pressing the IRS to suppress the Tea Party movement and political groups during the 2010-12 election period. That's how you steal elections in plain sight, when you use the IRS to suppress your entire political opposition. And the Tea Party, to be clear, was suppressed in 2012. You may recall, Larry, everyone was asking, what happened to the Tea Party? Yeah. The IRS shut it down.
That's right.
Mr. Obama.
That's right. They were so active in 2010, and suddenly during President Obama's reelection, they were not nearly as effective. Our guest is Tom Fitton of Judicial Watch. Now, I wrote about this report this morning in my column at the Washington Times, and about 3 hours later, I got an email from Senator McCain's office. I want to read you a little bit of the pushback they gave me, and I want you to respond. Judicial Watch's allegations that Senator McCain was somehow involved in the IRS's targeting of conservative groups were debunked in 2015 and have no merit. As the record shows, Senator McCain was one of the most outspoken critics of the IRS's bias against conservative groups and abuse of power under the Obama administration. After the extent of IRS targeting of conservative groups was revealed, he calls for Lois Lerner to be fired, and she went on to talk about other things that Senator McCain had done. What's your response?
His office asked Lois Lerner to audit these groups in a financially ruinous way. And we never said it was Tea Party.
Right.
You know, the documents speak for themselves. And in 2015, he pushed back. And I recall getting a phone call from a Senate staffer back then on McCain's staff, or who had worked at the staff, who was at the meeting, and they told me that they were just along for the ride, and they didn't really have anything to say at the meeting, and they were just there as minority staff. Look at these notes, and you'll see that's not true. They were pushing as much on the IRS as the Democratic staff. And when you look at the notes, you can see no philosophical difference or difference in approach between the questions and the concerns of the McCain staff and the Democratic senators.
And let's put this into a larger context. Let's say Senator John McCain, after losing in the primaries to George W. Bush in 2000, he saw campaign finance as his number one issue, and he passed a campaign finance law. Now, much of that got struck down with Citizens United, and when the Citizens United decision came in, Tom Fitton, that's when a lot of these public advocacy, political advocacy groups started to sprout up. It just so happens that a huge number of them were Tea Party groups, right? Conservative groups.
Well, and they were already there. They just decided they didn't like them, and they thought they could regulate them as a result of the McCain-Feingold law. That law was curtailed significantly by the Supreme Court. President Obama famously attacked the Supreme Court during the Supreme State of the Union address.
Yeah.
McCain was fulminating about it, and so it looks like, according to this meeting, they were pressuring the IRS to do what the law wouldn't allow them to do through regulation and through illegal audit activity.
It's certainly not out of character for Senator McCain to be, somewhat animated about these advocacy groups, considering his history and the legislation he passed for trying to curtail them. Tom Fitton, I know you're a busy guy. Do you have a little bit more? Can I keep you over a break here? Because I would love to get you to respond to the IG reports, only if you have the time. I know you're busy.
Sure, I can stay.
Oh, fantastic.
Live and local. You're listening to The Larry O'Connor Show.
Tom Fitton, I do want to get to this IG report, but one follow-up on this. I mean, it's an outrageous suggestion from a Senate staffer to the IRS to weaponize an audit so as to bring on financial ruin. First of all, that can't be legal. And we suspect that this sort of thing goes on. Is there any way to call these people before some sort of legal recompense? I mean, somebody should not be able to and should never suggest such a thing in a meeting, and the IRS should never do it.
Well, this is why Sessions did such a disservice by allowing his Justice Department to not reopen the IRS investigation back in 2017. They did an analysis, and they said, we're not going to reopen it. We're not going to prosecute Lois Lerner. None of that. And, it's this type of information that just shows why that was so inappropriate. Yeah. And no one is allowed in the IRS to audit someone for anything other than proper purposes. And obviously, auditing someone at the behest of the United States Senate, who has the purpose of not exposing misconduct, but just trying to make a political point, is completely inappropriate and would be illegal for the IRS to conduct any such audits. But it was that type of pressure that we're getting all the time from both Democrats and indirectly from President Obama as well. They saw the writing on the wall. The left wanted them to use the IRS to start auditing and pressing these groups by applying standards under IRS regulations on politically active groups that had never previously been applied. And conveniently, it happened around the time of the 2012 reelection.
Yeah, and as Congress and, as you said, Attorney General Sessions seems to have just sort of walked past that story and put it on the back burner or just ignored it completely. Tom Fitton and Judicial Watch, you are still on the job, and I appreciate that very much. We deserve that. Let's get to this IG report. It's sort of lost in the headlines these days because of the immigration narrative, and I think that there's a reason for that. This was incredibly damning, wasn't it, Tom?
Sure was. At least factually it was damning, and the conclusions were weak. But they show the Clinton investigation was a sham and corrupted through and through. And it was, and even in the corruption, it was incompetent. And then on top of that, you had some of the same people involved in that corruption running the anti-Trump Russia investigation, while they were bending over backwards to protect Hillary Clinton, they thought that the thing that, quote, mattered, and that's one of the texts that are in there, was the anti-Trump Russia investigation. And I think there's, again, a failure by Republican leadership on the Hill and honest Democrats to highlight the lack of credibility now and that the Mueller investigation has, because now we know it was conceived and what he inherited was so corrupted that they really can't move forward anymore.
Well, elaborate on that, because I keep hearing that. I keep even hearing some people on the left or some journalists who will say, yeah, there's some bad stuff there. Maybe Peter Strzok, he's the real bad guy in all of this, but it really has nothing to do with the Mueller investigation. But you're one of the people in this town who won't, sort of bend at the altar of Robert Mueller and say what a fantastic man and what a fantastic investigation this is. You see a connection, don't you?
Well, I mean, Peter Strzok worked on the Mueller investigation and led the FBI component of it until July or August of last year, and then he was fired or removed after these text messages were found by the IG, supposedly. And, of course, that move, and that was hidden from the American people in Congress for 4 months. It turns out there were other agents who had similar views uncovered by the IG who were on the Mueller team. And on top of that, you've got this partisanship issue with Mueller and the Comey leaking documents to get Mueller appointed, which was an illegal act. And so Mueller himself is compromised as a result of his being a witness in the Comey firing, because he applied actually or was interviewed for the job. So, is he going to interview himself now? I mean, what an unholy mess the Mueller investigation is. And someone's got to say, no, enough is enough. And, when you go to court, when you've got a special counsel, the purpose of it is to reassure the American people that things are being done without bias and above board and independent. That's why you've got a special counsel.
Right.
Well, we've got a special counsel, but special in all the wrong reasons in that regard. And my gosh.
And Tom Fitton, if Mueller does come back with something akin to an obstruction suggestion in his final report, the star witness will be James Comey. I mean, how damaged is James Comey at this point, considering he himself is under investigation for illegal leaks?
Well, and if he obviously didn't like President Trump, so he's not a reliable witness, and he's under criminal investigation, or could be soon, if the IG concludes he mishandled classified information. We already know he took improperly and leaked improperly President Trump's FBI files. He admitted to doing that.
And he admitted to doing it so that he could...
thought the law didn't apply to him.
Right.
In fact, he didn't even call it a leak, but reality check it was. Why? If I were Mueller, I would say, you know what? This isn't what I signed up for. I didn't know about all this gamesmanship behind the scenes. You find someone else to run this circus, Mr. Rosenstein. Yeah. I ain't doing it.
Well, unless, of course, Tom Fitton, this is exactly what Robert Mueller signed up for.
As I said, Mr. Mueller, who worked with the Lois Lerner IRS to try to figure out ways to put President Obama's political opponents in jail on specious reasons. You're right.
Tom Fitton, he's the president of Judicial Watch, and as I said, they're looking and investigating at things that Congress refuses to do for some odd reason, and we're glad we have you and Judicial Watch. And tell that great family of yours we said hi. I love seeing you with your daughters around town. Great family. Thanks, Tom.
You're welcome. Thank you. Bye-bye.